The H-caps cost $3 each, and you need at least 3 per day to get by. I was short, so I began working the hole with Roy. We would ride along, each looking out one side of a subway car until one of us spotted a flop sleeping on a bench. Then we would get off the train. I stood in front of the bench with the newspaper and covered Roy while he went through the lush's pockets. Roy would whisper instructions to me. A little left, too far, a little back, there, hold it there. And I would move to keep him covered. Often we were late and the lush would be lying there with his pockets turned inside out. We also worked on the cars. I would sit down next to the lush and open a newspaper. Roy would reach across my back and go through the lush's pockets. If the lush woke up, he would see that I had both hands on the paper. We averaged about $10 per night. An average night went more or less like this. We started work at about 11 o'clock, getting on the uptown IRT at Times Square. At 149th Street, I spotted a flop and we got off. 149th Street is a station with several levels and dangerous for lush workers because there are so many spots where cops can hide. It is not possible to cover from every angle. On the lower level, the only way out is by the elevator. We approached the flop casually, as though we did not see him. He was middle-aged, sprawled against the wall, breathing loudly. Roy sat down beside him and I stationed myself in front of him with an open newspaper. Roy said, "A little to the right, too far, back a little. There, that's good." Suddenly the heavy breathing stopped. I thought of the scene in the movies where the breathing stops during the operation. I could feel Roy's tense immobility behind me. The drunk muttered something and shifted his position. Slowly, the breathing started again. Roy got up. "Okay," he said, and walked rapidly to the other end of the platform. He took a crumpled mass of bills from his pocket and counted out $8. He handed me 4. Had it in his pants pocket. I couldn't find a poke. I thought for a minute he was going to come up on us. We started back downtown. At 116th, we spotted one and got off, but the flop got up and walked away before we could get near him. A shabby man with a wide, loose mouth accosted Roy and started talking. He was another lush worker. "The fags scored again," he said. 2 notes and a wristwatch down at 96th Street. Roy muttered something and looked at his paper. The man went on talking in a loud voice. "I had one come up on me. 'What are you doing with your hand in my pocket?' he says. 'For Christ's sake, don't talk like that,' Roy said, and walked away from him. 'Fucking wrong bastard,' he muttered. 'There aren't any lush workers around now. Only the fag, the beagle, and that tramp. They all envy the fag because he makes good scores. If a sucker comes up on him, he pretends to feel his leg like he was a fag. Those tramps at 103rd Street go around saying goddamn fag because they can't score. He's no more a fag than I am." Roy paused reflectively. "Not as much, in fact." We rode to the end of the line in Brooklyn without spotting a single flop. On the way back there was a drunk asleep in the car. I sat down beside him and opened my paper. I could feel Roy's arm across my back. Once, the drunk woke up and looked at me sharply, but both my hands were clearly visible on the paper. Roy pretended to be reading the paper with me. The drunk went back to sleep. "Here's where we get off," Roy said. "You better go out on this street for a bit. Doesn't pay to ride too long." We had a cup of coffee at the 34th Street Automat and split the last take. It was $3. "When you take a lush on the car," Roy was explaining, "you gotta gauge yourself to the movement of the car. If you get the right rhythm, you can work it out even if the mooch is awake." I went a little too fast on that one. That's why he woke up. He felt something was wrong, but he didn't know what it was. At Times Square, we ran into Subway Mike. He nodded but did not stop. Mike always worked alone. "Let's take a run out to Queens Plaza," Roy said. "That's on the Independent. and the Independent has special cops hired by the company, but they don't carry guns, only saps. So if one grabs you, run if you can break loose. Queens Plaza is another dangerous station where it is impossible to cover yourself from every angle. You just have to take a chance. There was a drunk sleeping full length on a bench, but we couldn't risk taking him because too many people were around. We'll wait a bit, Roy said. Remember though, never pass more than 3 trains. If you don't get a clear chance by then, forget it no matter how good it looks. 2 young punks got off a train carrying a lush between them. They dropped him on a bench, then looked at Roy and me. Let's take him over to the other side, said one of the punks. Why not take him right here, Roy asked. The punks pretended not to understand. Take him? I don't get it. What does our queer friend mean? They picked up their lush and carried him to the other side of the platform. Roy walked over to our mark and pulled a wallet out of his pocket. No time for finesse, he remarked. The wallet was empty. Roy dropped it on the bench. One of the punks shouted across the tracks, "Take your hands out of his pockets," and they both laughed. Fucking punks, said Roy. If I catch one of them on the west side line, I'll push the little bastard onto the tracks. One of the punks came over and asked Roy for a cut. I tell you, he didn't have nothing, said Roy. We saw you take out his wallet. There wasn't nothing in it. The train stopped and we got on, leaving the punk there, undecided whether or not to get tough. Fucking punks think it's a joke, Roy said. They won't last long. They won't think it's so funny when they get out on the island doing 529. We were in a run of bad luck. Roy said, well, that's the way it goes. Some nights you make $100, some nights you don't make anything. One night we got on the subway at Times Square. A flashily dressed man, weaving slightly, was walking ahead of us. Roy looked him over and said, that's a good fucking mooch. Let's see where he goes. The mooch got on the IRT headed for Brooklyn. We waited, standing up in the space between cars until the mooch appeared to be sleeping. Then we walked into the car, and I sat down beside the mooch, opening the New York Times. The Times was Roy's idea. He said it made me look like a businessman. The car was almost empty. There we were wedged up against the mooch with 20 feet of empty seats available. Roy began working over my back. The mooch kept stirring, and once he woke up and looked at me with a bleary annoyance. A Negro sitting opposite us smiled. The shine is wise, said Roy in my ear. He's okay. Roy was having trouble finding the poke. The situation was getting dangerous. I could feel sweat running down my arms. Let's get off, I said. No, this is a good mooch. He's sitting on his overcoat, and I can't get into his pocket. When I tell you, fall up against him, and I'll move the coat at the same time. Now, for Christ's sake, that wasn't near hard enough. Let's get off, I said. I could feel the fear stirring in my stomach. He's going to wake up. No, let's go again. Now. What in the hell is wrong with you? Just let yourself flop against him hard. Roy, I said, for Christ's sake, let's get off. He's going to wake up. I started to get up, but Roy held me down. Suddenly, he gave me a sharp push, and I fell heavily against the mooch. Got it that time, Roy said. The poke? No, I got the coat out of the way. We were out of the underground now and on the elevated. I was nauseated with fear, every muscle rigid with effort of control. The mooch was only half asleep. I expected him to jump up and yell at any minute. Finally, I heard Roy said, I got it. Let's go then. No, what I got is a loose roll. He's got a poke somewhere, and I'm going to find it. He's got to have a poke. I'm getting off. No, wait. I could feel him fumbling across my back so openly it seemed incredible that the man could go on sleeping. It was the end of the line. Roy stood up. Cover me, he said. I stood in front of him with the paper shielding him as much as possible from the other passengers. There were only 3 left, but they were in different ends of the car. Roy went through the man's pockets openly and crudely. Let's go outside, he said. We went out onto the platform. The mooch woke up and put his hand in his pocket. Then he came out onto the platform and walked up to Roy. All right, Jack, he said. Give me the money. Roy shrugged and turned his hands out, palm up. What money? What are you talking about? You know goddamn well what I'm talking about. You had your hand in my pocket. Roy held his hands out again in a gesture of puzzlement and deprecation. Oh, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about your money. I've seen you on this line every night. This is your regular route. He turned and pointed at me. And there's your partner right there. Now, are you going to give me my dough? What dough? Okay, you stay put. We're taking a ride back to town, and this better be good. Suddenly, the man put both hands in Roy's coat pockets. You son of a bitch, he yelled. Give me my dough. Roy hit him in the face and knocked him down. Why, you, said Roy, dropping abruptly his conciliatory and puzzled manner. Keep your hands off me. The conductor, seeing a fight in progress, was holding up the train so that no one would fall in the tracks. Let's cut, I said. We started down the platform. The man got up and ran after us. He threw his arms around Roy, holding on stubbornly. Roy couldn't break loose. He was pretty well winded. Get this mooch off me, Roy yelled. I hit the man twice in the face. His grip loosened and he fell to his knees. Kick his head off, said Roy. I kicked the man in the side and felt a rib snap. The man put his hand to his side. Help, he shouted. He did not try to get up. Let's cut, I said. At the far end of the platform, I heard a police whistle. The man was still lying there on the platform, holding his side and yelling, help, at regular intervals. There was a slight drizzle of rain falling. When I hit the street, I slipped and skidded on the wet sidewalk. We were standing by a closed filling station, looking back at the elevated. Let's go, I said. They'll see us. We can't stay here. We started to walk. I noticed that my mouth was bone dry. Roy took 2 goofballs from his shirt pocket. Mouth's too dry, he said. I can't swallow them. We went on walking. There's sure to be an alarm out for us, Roy said. Keep a lookout for cars. We'll duck in the bushes if any come along. They'll be figuring to get us back on the subway. So the best thing we can do is keep walking. The drizzle continued. Dogs barked at us as we walked. Remember our story if we get nailed, Roy said. We fell asleep and woke up at the end of the line. This guy accused us of taking his money. We were scared, so we knocked him down and ran. They'll beat the shit out of us. You have to expect that. Here comes a car, I said. Yellow lights, too. We crawled into the bushes at the side of the road and crouched down behind a signboard. The car drove slowly by. We started walking again. I was getting sick and wondered if I could get home to the MS I'd stashed in my apartment. When we get closer, we better split up, Roy said. Out here, we might be able to do each other some good. We run into a cop on the beat. We'll tell him we've been with some girls and we're looking for the subway. This rain is a break. The cops will all be in some all-night joint drinking coffee. For Christ's sakes, he rasped irritably. Don't round like that. I turned around and looked over my shoulder. It's natural to turn around, I said. Natural for thieves. We finally ran into the BMT line and rode back to Manhattan. Roy said, I don't think I'm just speaking for myself when I say I was scared. Oh, here's your cut. He handed me $3. Next day I told him I was through as a lush worker. I don't blame you, he said, but you got a wrong impression. You're bound to get some good breaks if you stick around long enough. Junky by William Burroughs.